The Caldwell mansion was a fortress of quiet, old-money wealth, nestled in the rolling plains of Oklahoma. Inside, the air hummed with a different kind of energy. The annual Caldwell Charity Gala was just hours away, and every surface of the sprawling house had been polished to a mirror shine. Elena, a young maid with a practical, no-nonsense demeanor and hands that had known hard work long before this job, was finishing her duties in the formal study. She meticulously straightened a row of leather-bound books, her movements a stark contrast to the casual extravagance around her. For Elena, a recent immigrant who had worked tirelessly to secure a visa and this prestigious position, the house was a job, not a home. She respected the antiques and the priceless art, but she knew the true value of things lay elsewhere. She paused, feeling a subtle vibration from her phone in her pocket. It was the standard emergency alert system. It had been buzzing intermittently for the last hour, but this one was different. The text was urgent. Tornado warning, Central Oklahoma County, take shelter immediately. A cold knot of dread formed in her stomach. Outside, the sky was transforming. It had lost its brilliant blue, replaced by a strange, sickly green hue that seemed to absorb all light. She had heard the stories, and she knew the color meant danger. The first siren started its mournful wail in the distance, a long, low sound that was easily dismissed in the insulated world of the Caldwell estate. Elena hurried to the grand ballroom, where Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell were arguing over the placement of a silver candelabra. "Mr. Caldwell," Eleanor said, her voice cutting through their bickering, "the weather has changed. There's a tornado warning. We need to get to the storm cellar." Mr. Caldwell, a man whose entire worldview was built on the premise that money could solve any problem, gave her a condescending smile. He waved a dismissive hand. "Nonsense, Elena. It's just a summer storm. The weather apps are always overreacting. My ancestors built this house to last 100 years, not to be rattled by a little wind." "Sir, the sirens are sounding," she insisted, her heart pounding. "It's not just wind." Just then, their son Brandon strode into the room, his expensive suit perfectly tailored, his face a mask of casual arrogance. He overheard Elena's plea and let out a scoffing laugh. "Is she serious? Freaking out over a little rain? You'd think the sky was falling." The laughter from the family was like a physical slap. They saw her not as a person with a genuine concern, but as an over-anxious servant. They saw her frayed work apron and heard her slight accent, and they immediately dismissed her as hysterical and uneducated. Mr. Caldwell turned back to his wife. "Just get the caterers to secure the outdoor tables. The gala will go on as planned." But the world outside was no longer responding to their plans. A sudden, violent gust of wind slammed against the immense bay windows, rattling the heavy glass in its frame. The power flickered, plunging the ballroom into a disorienting twilight before the generators kicked in with a low hum. The sound outside was no longer wind. It was a hungry, mechanical roar that seemed to swallow all other noise. The family's laughter died in their throats as the roaring grew to a deafening, grinding cacophony. The chandelier above them began to swing wildly, the prisms clinking like 1,000 tiny bells. A sudden, jarring crackle, and the lights went out completely. The generator had failed. In the pitch black, the sound was all that was left, a horrifying, tearing noise that spoke of unimaginable power. "The house is built to last!" Mr. Caldwell shrieked, his voice filled with a terror that money couldn't buy. "The cellar!" Elena yelled, her voice raw with urgency. She grabbed a terrified Mrs. Caldwell and pulled her toward the servants' entrance, an old, sturdy wooden door that led to the basement. A younger kitchen assistant, a boy no older than 16, was huddled by the wall, whimpering. Elena pulled him to his feet. "Come on!" she screamed over the noise, her heart hammering against her ribs. Behind them, the terrifying sound of the grand ballroom roof being ripped off the foundation echoed through the house. The walls began to shake violently, plaster raining down. Eleanor shoved the others through the basement door, just as a massive oak beam from the ceiling crashed down where they had been standing seconds before. They stumbled down the old wooden stairs into the storm cellar, a small, dark, concrete room that smelled of damp earth. The door slammed shut behind them, just as the sound of the Caldwell mansion's century-old foundation finally gave way to the unimaginable force of nature. In the darkness and the silence that followed, they were left with the knowledge that the world they knew had just been completely erased. The silence that followed the storm was more terrifying than the noise itself. The roar had been replaced by an unholy quiet, broken only by the distant wail of sirens and the drip of rain through a non-existent roof. For what felt like an eternity, Eleanor, Mrs. Caldwell, and the young kitchen assistant huddled together in the dark, their breathing ragged. The air was thick with the scent of wet soil and plaster dust. Finally, when she was certain the immediate danger had passed, Eleanor pushed the heavy cellar door open. The scene that greeted them was apocalyptic. Where the magnificent Caldwell mansion had stood, there was now only a jagged skeleton of splintered wood, twisted metal, and broken dreams. The morning light cast a strange, muted glow over the devastation, revealing a landscape of shredded trees and scattered possessions. The grand ballroom, with its polished floors and pristine chandeliers, was now a crater of rubble. A porcelain doll that Elena had dusted earlier that day lay in the mud, its head cracked in two. Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell emerged from the wreckage of the living room, their clothes torn and covered in dust, their faces streaked with soot and minor cuts. They looked like ghosts haunting a grave. They had sought shelter under a heavy dining table, a futile and symbolic gesture of their belief that their possessions could protect them. The first thing Mr. Caldwell saw as he stared at the ruins of his life was Elena. The sheer shock of the destruction gave way to a surge of misplaced anger. He pointed a trembling, grimy finger at her. "You!" he croaked, his voice raw and filled with impotent rage. "Why didn't you make us listen? You knew! You're the one who works here. You should have been more forceful. You should have warned us sooner." The words felt like a betrayal. Elena stood there, stunned, the full weight of the storm now overshadowed by a new, more personal tragedy. She had saved their lives, and in return he was blaming her for his own arrogance. Mrs. Caldwell, her face streaked with tears and dirt, just looked on, her grief and shock too profound for her to protest her husband's cruelty. As the first responders arrived, a journalist from a local news channel, drawn by the scale of the destruction, began interviewing survivors. A fire chief, having heard the details from a rescued neighbor, pointed the journalist toward Elena. "She was the one who got people to safety," the chief said, his voice full of respect. "A lot of people are alive because of her quick thinking." The reporter, her eyes wide with a mix of compassion and professional curiosity, approached Elena. "Is it true you got people to the storm cellar?" she asked softly. Eleanor simply nodded, too overwhelmed to speak, but Mr. Caldwell, catching the reporter's attention, tried to seize control of the narrative. "There was a miscommunication," he said, smoothing down his tattered suit jacket in a gesture of pathetic dignity. "My staff didn't make the severity of the situation clear. We were caught completely by surprise." His attempt to shift blame was so transparent that the reporter and a nearby paramedic exchanged a look of shared disgust. The community was not buying the story of the powerful man whose staff had failed him. They were buying the story of the maid who had been ignored. At the community shelter set up in the town's high school gym, the contrast was even starker. Elena, still in her work clothes, found herself surrounded by people offering gratitude and comfort. She helped organize donated clothes, she comforted a distraught mother, and she shared her cot with the young kitchen assistant who was still too shaken to sleep alone. For the first time in her life in America, she felt like she was a part of something, not just an employee in a grand house. The Caldwells, now stripped of their wealth and status, were isolated and alone. Their clothes were dirty, their faces were pale, and they sat in a corner, unable to connect with the regular people around them. They saw the respect and camaraderie Elena was receiving, and their resentment burned, not at the tornado that had taken everything, but at the woman who had saved their lives and, in doing so, had revealed their true, ugly character to the world. The weeks that followed the tornado became a slow, deliberate season of rebuilding. The community, once a quiet patchwork of wealthy estates and modest homes, was now a hive of activity, bound together by a shared trauma and an unyielding spirit of resilience. The empty lots where homes once stood were filled with the sound of hammers and saws. Elena, now living in a small, temporary apartment provided by a local church, found her purpose in the collective effort. She no longer dusted antiques or polished silver. Instead, she helped organize volunteers, distribute supplies, and offer comfort to those who were still in shock. Her story had become a local legend, a quiet testament to the fact that true leadership could emerge from the most unexpected places. Her quick thinking and compassion during the disaster were recognized not just by the news, but by every person she met. She was no longer just the Maid. She was Eleanor, a valued member of the community. The Caldwells, meanwhile, were a study in silent suffering. Their insurance company was still sifting through the fine print, and they had been forced to move into a modest, two-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. The loss of their home and fortune was a profound, painful lesson in humility. Mr. Caldwell, unable to live on the charity of others, had taken a job as a stocker at a small hardware store, a daily humiliation for a man who had once ruled a corporate empire. He would come home each night, his hands sore and his pride shattered, unable to look his wife in the eye. One crisp autumn afternoon, Eleanor was helping to rebuild a fence for an elderly neighbor, her hands calloused and strong from honest labor. She was focused on her work when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see Mr. Caldwell standing there, his shoulders slumped, carrying a few bags of cement and a pair of work gloves. The old haughtiness was completely gone, replaced by a deep, weary humility. He stood there for a long, awkward moment, unable to meet her gaze. The pride that had defined his life had been ripped away, and all that was left was a man forced to confront his own profound failure. "Elena," he finally said, his voice barely a whisper, a sound completely different from the booming pronouncements she had known. I want to thank you." He hesitated, swallowing hard. "You saved us. You told us what was coming and we just laughed. We were so wrong. I was so wrong. I'm sorry." The apology hung in the air, a bridge built of shame and regret. Elena looked at him, not with resentment, but with a quiet understanding. She saw not the arrogant employer, but a man who had finally been forced to see the world beyond his own privilege. She saw his pain, and for the first time she felt empathy for him. She didn't offer a dramatic hug or a poetic speech. Instead, she simply gestured to a loose fence post. "Here," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "hold this steady. It's a two-person job." And for the rest of the day, they worked together in silence, two people from different worlds, now united by a shared task. The physical labor was a form of silent absolution for him and a profound symbol of her new life. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the new fence, Eleanor looked out over the town, seeing the small new homes rising from the foundations of the old. She had lost her job, but she had gained a community. She had been laughed at, but she was now respected. The tornado had taken everything from the Caldwells, but it had given her a purpose, a sense of belonging, and the strength to rebuild not just fences, but her own life, one solid post at a time.